Hi friends, my name is Angela and welcome to my YouTube channel and welcome to the end of September. Today I'm going to share with you the books that I read this month, and there were some good books, although I did have a bit of a reading slump. I finished a couple of books at the start of the month, which were kind of one of them I started towards the end of August, and then I picked up another one immediately after, and then the 2 weeks in the middle of the month I didn't read a lot. I'd read a little bit on my commute. But other than that, I really did not read much. I just was not motivated to do it at all. It was just a slump, plain and simple. But then, of course, you come out of these things, and towards the end of the month, I finished off a couple of books. So all in all, it was okay. I do have a couple of books still on the go that I did start at the start of September that I haven't yet finished, but it's okay. It's not a big deal. I'm not in this isn't a big race. I'm not racing towards anything. I'm okay with that. But slumps happen. This was one of them. September was Slumpy September. Maybe that'll be the name of this one, Slumpy September. Slumps really do happen to the best of us, and I think the best way to handle it is just to acknowledge it and just live in it and take a breather from reading, not to force yourself into it. I think that's the best way to manage it. And then when you start to feel that pull back towards books, I usually go for low-hanging fruit. Whether it's authors that I'm familiar with or shorter books that are actually small in duration, or the story is going to be fast paced, or it's a genre that I know, whether it is maybe something like a Greek mythology retelling is usually something I know that is probably going to be something I love, or even something that I've read before is a really great way to get out of a slump. Something that that you read previously that you really loved, that's a great way to get back into reading as well. And you'll kind of see some of the books that I chose to kind of get back into reading mode as the month went on. But let's get into the books that I did read in September, in Slumpy September. The first one I finished at the start of the month was Shadows of Winter Robins by Louise Wolhuter. And this is a unique novel for me because it is actually based in Perth, where I am. And it was very unique because a lot of the places that were described were places that I knew, that I could picture in my mind as I read the locations. And something that was very interesting was in one particular scene, a view was being described out of a window. The main character was looking out of a window and a view was being described. I was sitting in the lunchroom having my lunch, reading a chapter, and I was looking at the same view that the character was describing, which was kind of eerie, but that made the book very interesting and very close. So I enjoyed this book. This was a very, very good book. It was very engaging. It opens with Winter Robins is the name of the main character, and it opens with Winter, or Winnie as she likes to be called, talking to a counsellor. And we realise that this isn't a voluntary counselling session. She's actually mandated to talk to this counsellor for some reason that we're not sure of. And she starts to talk about her past, what it was like growing up, if she had siblings, what her parents were like. We flash back into her past. And as Winnie reflects on her past, we go back to England in the mid-90s, and she's about 8 years old. She's living a very normal, very happy life with her parents. Her mother is Australian. She was traveling around Europe like a lot of Australians do at some point, and she ended up staying in England, and she married Winnie's father, and she stayed there. And Winnie doesn't know much about her mother's family. Her mother does not talk about her family. She really doesn't talk about anything about living in Australia or being there. She has cut all ties. But other than that, her life is very happy. Her and her brother have a very happy upbringing. But then her mother suddenly gets sick and she dies. And that changes everything. Her father does not deal with this well. He turns to drinking. The kids end up going to live with Winter's paternal grandmother, who is quite old, and she's really not able to look after them as well as she should. And so eventually an uncle appears who Winter has never heard of before, who is their mother's brother from Australia, and he has come to take them home. He has been called because there is really no other family that they can think of that will be able to look after these kids. So Winter and her twin brother four, go to Australia with their uncle, and they're essentially living with their extended family on this small plot of land on the coast around in Western Australia. It's a few hours outside of Perth. It's definitely not in a high density area. It's remote. And she begins to get to know her family, and she really does begin to love them. Her maternal grandfather is an artist, so there's a real free spirit kind of feeling as she's growing up. And she looks back on this time with a lot of fondness. But there's some things going on that maybe she didn't quite understand at the time. So this is all happening at the start of the story. It happens very quickly that they end up in Australia. And as Winnie goes through her counselling session, she talks about all of this, having to move to Australia and go through all of this. And when she's older, and in this counselling sessions, about 20 years after her first coming to Australia, a few news things pop up that start to spark some memories for her. And she starts to revisit that early time of her living with her family and the things that were happening. And she starts to remember and starts to think, were things really as idyllic as she remembers them at the time? So in the present day, she starts to really analyse and starts to go on a bit of a journey. So what starts as a bit of a coming of age story turns into quite an interesting suspense, mystery, thriller, a real thrill ride. And there was a lot of twisty little turns in this book that I didn't see coming. In the first 100 pages, I thought I saw the twist. I thought I got it, and I was wrong. And there was a twist after twist after twist, and it was very well done. It was each time there was a twist, I had to stop. I would stop and my mouth would be agape, and I would stop, and I would, when you would be like, hang on a minute, and you would have to go back a couple of paragraphs and reread it and then come back again and be like, what? And that happened multiple times. And it didn't feel like I was being cheated as the reader. It didn't feel too far-fetched. It felt like it was a great ride. I really did enjoy it. But there was some really strong themes through this, really, really, really good themes. This would be a great book for a book club, I think, a really, really good one. And the writing is beautiful. I want to read this particular passage when Winter and her brother first find out that their mother Nancy passes away. The writing is just so beautiful. There's something about it that is descriptive enough that it feels a little bit poetic, but it feels so rooted in something real. I don't know what it is. Lou is the name of Winter's father. Nancy won't be coming home, Lou told us, as if we were something she'd decided, as if she'd given us up for Lent, like chocolate. It was a warm spring afternoon and the whole estate was out. Flora and I were fielding a game of cricket. Auntie Vi was in her garden, flicking through her Woman's Weekly, and Nancy should have been legs out on a folding chair beside her with a silk cut and a glass of lemon barley. But instead there was Lou, limping towards us, and a moment later hollowed out on his knees. He didn't even take us inside, just rocked back on his big brown shoe and blew it at us like smoke. Nancy won't be coming home. And there it is, that pip of a moment, that instant, that fraction of a second, that weightless stillness at the very top of a ball's bounce, between its going up and falling down. It was beautiful writing. I really do recommend this book. If you can get hold of it, I think it's great. And it is a beautifully descriptive, example of growing up in Australia. I think there is a certain amount of that. I mean, there is quite a bit of shenanigans going on in Winter's family, but there is, I think it's a great little book. I do recommend this one. The next book I picked up was Hera by Jennifer Saint. This is my third Jennifer Saint book. I've read Electra, Ariadne, and now Hera. And this is the latest one to come out from Jennifer Saint. It's only just released this year or late last year in 2023. And I was really interested to read this because I think Hera is a Greek goddess that I feel has been overlooked. I feel like she hadn't been given that 3D treatment like other retellings. I think other goddesses or other Olympians or demigods had been given a real workover to become something a little more whole, and she hadn't. She was just kind of given this idea of being this really vengeful, jealous wife of Zeus, and I didn't really see much else from her than that. And so I was interested to pick it up from that perspective. And it was a good story. I feel like it was a really interesting ride because Hera was there from the beginning in Greek mythology. She was a Titan. She was there from the beginning when Zeus, she was She is Zeus's sister, as well as Zeus's wife. But I enjoyed reading about the creation of Mount Olympus and the selection of the Olympians and all the bits in between of Hera and her story, or her, Jennifer Saint's interpretation of it. I really did enjoy that, all the way through to how these gods were talking with each other, because some of the other stories that have been put out have been demigods or nymphs or people that are not quite on this level, like Ariadne and Electra are not on Mount Olympus. So these are gods who are talking with other gods, and they are putting things in action amongst humans on Earth. So it was even to the point where they were like, we're sitting around and we're bored doing nothing. Let's create a war between Sparta and Troy and see what happens. And 10 years later, that sort of stuff was kind of fascinating. I did enjoy thinking about how that kind of conversation might have gone in mythology. That was a little bit of fun. But for me, a lot of the story boiled down to this one little sentence. Hera was tied so strongly to Zeus, as much as she didn't want to be. Her entire life was tied to Zeus's. And this little teeny tiny sentence was kind of what I took away as being the entire plot of this book. All she knows, or Hera knows, is that he, Zeus, leaves a trail of broken women in his wake, and she is the most broken of them all. And it goes on to say that makes her the most dangerous woman, and he knows that, but he just doesn't care. He keeps doing what he does. And I really did enjoy it, and it was quite surprising towards the ending because, we know a lot of Greek mythology, but you don't really know how that sort of stuff ends. So if you're into Greek mythology retelling, definitely pick it up. I've now picked up Atalanta, there is a little bit in here about that, but I have not read that book yet. So I'm going to read that one next, which will be the fourth one of Jennifer Saint's, which will round out a nice little quartet of hers that I'll have read all of them. So it was a good one. But unfortunately, this book is, after this one, I went into my reading slump, and that was unusual because normally a Greek retelling or a myth retelling would be what I would use to get out of my slump. So I don't know what happened there. Maybe I raced through it too quickly. Something happened. I went into a bit of a slump. I was starting to read H is for Hawk. I was reading a few books on my bedside table. I was trying to read Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. Maybe that's what did it. Maybe I was just so daunted by that particular book. But anyway, I was struggling a bit, but I'm commuting. I commute to work on a train, and I do not like to sit there on my phone. I despise that. I really, really do hate it. So I have to take a book on the train. So I decided to take Daphne du Maurier's The Birds and Other Stories. And this was the perfect antidote. It has 6 stories in here. Starts off with The Birds, which is, of course, you probably know it because it was adapted into a movie by Alfred Hitchcock. The story in here, I think, is very different to the movie adaptation. It was very engaging. Then it goes on to 5 other stories. The back of the book says, 5 other chilling stories in this collection echo a sense of dislocation and mock man's sense of dominance over the natural world. And I think there is an element of that. It wasn't something I immediately picked up on as a common thread throughout, but there is that. And I think my favourite book out of these, or my favourite story, might have been one called The Apple Tree, which was quite interesting, followed by Mont Verita, which is the Mountain of Truth. But there was some really, every time I read a story and I'd be like, oh, that was my favourite story of this collection. And then I'd read another one and be like, oh, that was my favourite story. And it just kept happening. And there's only 6 stories in here. So I really do recommend this one. It was really great. What I like about Daphne du Maurier is that there's no cheap shots in here. It's not utilising gore or crass language or obscenities or cheap shots. It's just intelligent writing. There's a lot of human nature in here, a lot of human observation, and she leaves room for you to make your own decisions and your own observations about these people. And I find that really interesting. So I do recommend this. I think this is a great little book to have this on your bookshelf to pick up, maybe when you come into your own slump, maybe when you just need to pick up something just for a short read here or there. It is really, really good. And then they're not, I mean, the birds is quite iconic, but some of them, I wouldn't call them horror. Yeah, I wouldn't call a lot of them horror. They were just really just left you at the end going, huh. And you were just kind of thinking about it for a minute. It was really interesting. And then the last book that I ended September with was Heidi by Johanna Spyri. And this was published in like 1880, so it's like 140 years old. And initially as I was reading it, I thought, I think I've passed this. I don't think this is giving me the enjoyment that I get out of rereading something like Anne of Green Gables, Charlotte's Web, or something like that. But as I read on, I really did enjoy it. I thought it was quite beautiful. Heidi was on my spring TBR, and so I've knocked one of my spring TBR books off, which is great. And it's the perfect book for spring, with Heidi gallivanting around the Swiss Alps with goats. And, I can just picture it. I think it's the perfect book for spring. If you're not familiar with the story, it starts off with Heidi around 5 years of age when she basically starts off around when she's about 5. She's with her Aunt Didi, who's been raising her since she became an orphan. And Aunt Didi is bringing her to her grandfather to live with him because Aunt Didi's kind of done her start. She's started to bring her up, but now she needs to go and take up this job away. She can't take a child with her. So she's going to bring Heidi to live with her grandfather, who is a bit of a recluse, lives on a cabin on a mountain. He's quite a renowned, grumpy old man for very good reason. He's been through quite a bit. And initially when Heidi comes, he's quite resistant to having her there, but then he starts to see that she's really intelligent and resilient and resourceful, and he really does become to love her. And just as much as she loves being around him and being on the mountain and being this free-range chicken, she really is a child who loves nature. She truly loves it. But her grandfather, for whatever he decides that he does not want her to be educated, so she is illiterate. And by the time she turns 7 years old, her Aunt Didi comes back. She's heard of this position that she can get Heidi to be a companion for this young girl who is an invalid in Frankfurt. And this means that Heidi will be able to, have an education. She'll be able to live in a good house. She'll have some good opportunities. And living with the grandfather, everyone thinks is a bad idea. No one thinks it's a great idea for her, but Heidi loves it. She does not want to go. So Heidi leaves. She doesn't want to leave. She goes to live with this young girl named Clara, and she does the similar thing that she had done with her grandfather and the people of the town where her grandfather lived, where she endears them to her there as well. But she becomes really homesick. She lives for the mountains. She loves to be outside and to see the mountaintops and to feel the breeze on her skin and to hear the trees rustling. That's what she needs. She needs to be outside. And it's a bit like she becomes a caged bird living in the city. That's kind of where the story goes. And then she returns back home, and eventually Clara comes to visit her. And you start to see the restorative power of nature, which is a beautiful message for spring. It's a really charming book. It really does show how we are meant to connect with nature. We're not meant to be shut up in buildings all day, every day, and never see the sun and never be outside. It's something we realized when we were all in quarantines for coronavirus, right? When we were told you can't go outside and you can't do that. Everyone was like, I have to go outside. I have to be around people. I have to connect with nature and people. It's what we need as human beings, is to have that connection. And this is something that really hones that message in, I think, is that nature is restorative. It is essential, and I think it's a beautiful message for spring. It's a beautiful feel-good story. And I personally love all the little touches of living simply. I just love that stuff. Like there's a moment where Heidi opens a cupboard, like her grandfather's showing her around the cabin when she first gets there, which is very, very small. And he opens a cupboard to show her he opens the cupboard in the house, the cupboard, not a cupboard. And inside are his clothes. One shelf has his clothes. One shelf has the food, like a ham and some bread and some cheese, I think. And another shelf has a plate and a cup and some cutlery. And that's it. And I'm just like, I love that. I love the simplicity of that sort of stuff. All his worldly possessions were in one cupboard, so much so that he had to build another chair for her to sit on. You know, like I'm sitting at a table right now, filming this, at a table built for 10 people, and it's just me sitting at it. I just love that simplicity that people at that time had what they needed and didn't have more than what they needed. And I find something quite comforting in that. I don't know, it's something I've always kind of connected with. But that's just me. This has knocked off another one of my books off my children's reading classics project. I think the ones I have left to read are Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. But I keep adding books. I keep adding books to my project. So long as I don't add any more books to it, then those are the two that I have remaining, especially at least off my original list. Those are the two I've got remaining. So those are the books that I read for September. I can't believe it, September. Doing pretty well. I think I've exceeded my goal of how many books I wanted to read for the year already, which is interesting. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how October goes. I would love to know what your best book for the month was in the comments below. I don't know if I could pick a favourite of my books. I really don't. I think it would have to be a toss-up between Shadows of Winter Robins and The Birds and Other Stories. Quite a common theme. But I think they were really great, really, really great. But I would highly recommend, if you can get hold of either of those, do. And if you've got a book club, I would recommend this one. It's got some really incredible themes in there. So I would love to hear below what your favourite book was for the month. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.